Smack. A sharp crack echoed through the first-class lounge, and phones snapped up in unison, capturing every furious detail. The camera caught her hand, poised mid-air, and then the stunned realization on his face as the red lipsticked palm met sunlit skin. "Tell us where you're watching from." A text overlay blazed across the screen, daring viewers to join the conversation. Within seconds, comments flooded in Los Angeles. "Can't believe that just happened." "I'm in Lagos." New York here. Flight attendant lost it." And just like that, every eye in Terminal 3 trained on the man seated in 1A. Seyfu Bako-Nejad took a slow breath, his cheek tingling where the impact landed. He remained perfectly still, no gasp, no protest, just the faintest narrowing of dark brown eyes. Around him, passengers buzzed with disbelief. A mother clutched her toddler, a businesswoman lowered her champagne flute, and a suited banker stepped back. Phone raised. Clara, the lead flight attendant, stood rigid behind the counter. Her gold-trimmed uniform gleamed under the overhead lights, but the confident spark in her eyes had hardened into something sharper, righteous. Indignation. "You don't belong in this seat," she spat, voice trembling. "I don't care what your ticket says." He let the words hang in the air. Then he quietly slid his boarding pass across the gate desk. 1A, printed in bold black ink. Moments earlier, Seyfu had been another anonymous face in the first-class lounge. He sipped water from a single-stemmed glass, gaze drifting over polished marble floors and the muted hum of travelers. His gray tunic and simple jacket bore no insignia of rank. No entourage flanked him. To the untrained eye, he might have been a visiting academic or a tech consultant returning from a conference. But Seyfu wasn't merely passing through. He was coming home from Geneva, where he had just signed the final memorandum of a $2.3 billion peace accord between Iran and Israel. Under diplomatic seal, the deal promised to stabilize the region. He boarded this flight believing the hard work was done, only to find prejudice waiting at Gate 4. Behind the desk, Clara recovered first. She leveled her gaze at the pass. "Fake ticket," she muttered. "Just another scam." She tapped her tablet. "We'll refund your money." "Step aside." He flexed his fingers against the smooth leather of his notebook and spoke calmly. "I'm here to take my seat." Phones recorded every micro-expression, even the junior attendant, a young man in glasses, edged closer. He scanned the boarding pass with his handheld device, and a green checkmark glowed. "It's valid," he said in a low voice. Clara's jaw clenched. "It doesn't matter," she snapped. "You look like someone who doesn't belong here." A ripple of outrage spread through the small crowd. One woman whispered, "That's not right." A man in a navy suit frowned and lowered his phone. Another bystander leaned forward. Crossing his arms, Seyfu closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of polished leather seats and citrus-spritzed cabin air. He did not raise his voice. He did not step back. In that silence, he held himself with a dignity that whispered louder than any protest. Finally, Clara snapped her fingers. "Fine," she said, her voice brittle. "Go on. Just don't say I didn't warn you." She stepped aside, and he passed. The jet bridge felt like a tunnel of stairs. Each footstep echoed in his mind. But he remained composed. Once aboard, he tucked his carry-all into the overhead bin and eased into seat 1A. He buckled his belt, unfolded a slim leather notebook, and began to write. Long, deliberate strokes. Clara hovered briefly at the cabin door before turning away. She replayed the moment in her mind, lips pressed into a thin line. How dare he, how dare anyone challenge her authority? Across the aisle sat Marianne Dupont, a French executive with pearl earrings and a calm demeanor. She caught Clara's eye and tilted her head in quiet question. Clara forced a smile before whisking away to serve drinks to other passengers. Everyone but him. Just then, a soft chime sounded overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for departure. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened." The engines roared to life, a mechanical chorus announcing that the journey had begun. Seyfu closed his notebook and gazed out the window. The lights of Dubai blurred as the plane taxied toward the runway. He drew his knees in, hands resting lightly on the edge of the seat. In that moment, he felt the weight of every prejudice he'd endured, from schoolyard taunts to diplomatic snubs. But he also felt the quiet strength that had carried him through countless negotiations. both in boardrooms and back channels. 30 seconds in, viewers would already know they were witnessing more than just in-flight drama. They'd see a man of honor tested by disdain, and they'd wonder, who is he? What happens next? By the time the wheels left the tarmac, Seyfu Bako Nejad had transformed from a silent passenger into the calm eye of a rising storm, one that would shake global politics and remind the world that respect is never optional, no matter the seat you claim. Seyfu Bako Nejad settled deeper into his seat as the cabin door slid shut with a soft hiss. The seatbelt sign glowed red above him, and a hush fell over first class, broken only by the distant whir of engines and the faint click of latches sealing overhead bins. He closed his eyes briefly and inhaled the scented air, leather polish, faint jasmine from hand towels, the reassuring hum of pressurized comfort. Around him, however, the peace was fracturing. A ripple of conversation swept through the cabin, starting with a low murmur in row 2. Marianne Dupont straightened in 2B, pearl earrings catching the overhead light as she leaned toward her neighbor. "Did you see that?" she whispered, eyes waned. Her neighbor, a tech entrepreneur in a tailored suit, tapped his temple with one finger. "Yeah?" She slapped him, hard. "I thought first class was supposed to be, well, elevated." A young banker in 3C chimed in, brow furrowed. But his boarding pass was legitimate. "I saw the scan." He tapped his tablet, bringing up a paused video of the gate agent's handheld device. A bright green checkmark glowed against a white background. "Green means go," he muttered. "So why did she do it?" Across the aisle, an older couple exchanged perplexed glances. "Does he work for?" the husband began. His wife shook her head. "No idea. Didn't look like a diplomat." Their speculation triggered a cascade of theories. Was he a clandestine arms broker, a visiting academic thrown into the wrong lane? Maybe an exiled royal living undercover. Some passengers whispered CIA asset. Others swore they heard a faint accent. Not European, not quite Arab. Something else, Marianne scoffed softly. "That accent, it's Persian, I'd bet. He must be Iranian." At that, the tech entrepreneur nodded slowly. "Returning from Tehran, perhaps." He glanced toward the curtained galley across the aisle, where Clara and 2 junior attendants were finishing pre-flight checks. Clara noticed the passenger's stares and cleared her throat. Propping a clipboard against her hip, she marched toward Seyfu's row, heels clicking on aisle carpet. The hush fell instantly. "Sir," she said, voice low but carrying across 3 rows. "I'm going to ask you again to step out of first class." Seyfu opened his eyes and looked at her over the rim of his notebook. His voice was steady. "I have a valid first-class ticket," he said simply. Clara's jaw tightened. "You may have one, but your behavior isn't suitable." "Let me see it again." He handed it over without a word. Marianne Dupont, sitting 1 seat over, nudged the entrepreneur. He retrieved his tablet and replayed the video for Clara. 2 beeps. Green checkmark. Clara's face paled. She glanced at the formality of his hand, the way he held his posture. How dare he, as if sensing her scrutiny. Seyfu closed the notebook and looked away, toward the window where the tarmac lights blurred with movement. "I'll call security," Clara hissed. "You refuse to comply, so I have no choice." The cabin fell completely silent. Even the drone of engines seemed to pause. Marianne Dupont's lips parted, as though about to speak, but she hesitated, caught between empathy and protocol. The entrepreneur leaned forward, phone in hand. "That's not fair," he said, voice firm. "He's paid for this seat just like the rest of us." Clara's eyes flicked to him, nostrils flaring. "Mind your own business," she snapped. "I'll manage this." Seyfu felt a subtle tightening in his chest, the familiar coil of tension he'd learned to recognize over decades of high-stakes negotiation. He closed his eyes again, counting a steady, silent rhythm. 1, 2, 3. He did not raise his voice. He did not physically move. His calm alone was more unsettling than any argument. Marianne tapped her purse and leaned closer, whispering under her breath. He's giving her time to reconsider. Clara took a shaky breath, stepping back. For a moment, she looked at the other flight attendants behind her, the junior staff who had scanned his pass. Their expressions, a mixture of sympathy and caution. She realized she had already lost whatever veneer of control she'd had. "Fine," she spat, voice low. "Sit down." "Then," Seifu nodded politely and returned his ticket to his jacket pocket. Clara turned on her heel and stalked back to the galley, flipping her clipboard shut with a clap that drew more attention. The cabin atmosphere shifted, electric with aftershocks. Phones recorded in whispered tones. Comments scrolled across screens, and an invisible current of solidarity hummed through the seats. In row 4, a businessman lowered his tablet and said quietly, he didn't defend himself. That was powerful. Seifu looked up, meeting the businessman's eyes for a heartbeat. Then he turned back to the window, as if to confirm that nothing had changed outside. A soft chime announced the final cabin check. Clara, reined in but visibly unsettled, moved to her station at the front. She delivered the safety briefing with clipped precision, every enunciation immaculate, every gesture measured. But the lyrics of her own confidence escaped her. Her voice wavered when she reached Seifu's row, leaving him alone in a charged silence. Once the seatbelt sign clicked off, Marianne leaned over. I hope you don't mind, she said, voice gentle, but I've started a live stream. People need to know what happened. She tapped her phone and showed Seifu the real-time comments flooding in outrage. Support. Disbelief. He offered a small, appreciative nod. Thank you, he said softly, as Marianne slipped back to her seat. Seifu opened his notebook again. He wrote a single sentence in elegant Persian script, pausing to choose each word. A single act of hatred can erase years of hard-won trust. He gazed at the line for a moment, then closed the notebook and tucked it away. The flight attendant service began hot towels, a choice of sparkling wine or juice. Trays of canapes paraded down the aisle. Clara passed him by without meeting his eye, empty-handed. The junior attendant hesitated, then offered a fresh towel. Seifu accepted with a small smile. From his seat, he surveyed the cabin like a conductor listening for discord in an orchestra. There was curiosity now, raw, unspoken interest in the man who would not break. The lesson of Chapter 2 was clear despite words cast like stones. His silence and dignity spoke volumes. Outside, the plane descended through golden sunset clouds. Inside, a different kind of storm was gathering, one that began with whispers, built on speculation, and would soon erupt into a revelation no passenger would see coming. Clara didn't stay away for long. Barely 5 minutes after serving the other passengers, she re-emerged from the galley, arms folded and jaws set like a drawn dagger. The cabin lights glinted off her name badge as she paused directly in front of seat 1A. All eyes turned. Even the flight attendants behind her leaned forward, sensing the tension. Sir, Clara said, voice low but firm, you need to leave first class. Now, Seifu Bako Nejad looked up from his journal, a slim leather notebook where he'd begun sketching lines of poetry earlier, and met her gaze without flinching. His tone was deliberate, controlled. I have a ticket for this seat, ma'am. I paid for 1A. A ripple of murmurs swept through the rows. Marianne Dupont exhaled softly and whispered to the entrepreneur beside her. Here we go again. The banker in 3C tapped his fingertips on the armrest. Frustrated, Clara's nostrils flared. I don't care what your ticket says. First class is reserved for passengers of a certain standard, and you clearly don't meet it. Her words cut through the cabin like a blade. The entrepreneur rose halfway out of his seat, phone in hand. That's bullshit. His voice was hushed but steady. He's paid the same fare as the rest of us. Clara turned on him with a scowl. Mind your own business. She pointed at Seifu. You. Step aside. The junior attendant, Malik, stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. He held up the handheld scanner. Ma'am, when I scanned his pass, it verified. There's no reason to remove him. Clara's eyes narrowed at Malik. You scanned it wrong, or you're in on the scam. Malik swallowed, jaw tight. I work for this airline. I do not conspire. He looked to Seifu. Sir, I'm sorry. She's mistaken. Seifu closed his notebook and tucked it into his jacket. He leaned forward and rested his hands on his knees. His voice dropped to a calm baritone that carried across the aisle. Let's not make this uncomfortable for everyone, he said. If there's an issue, let me speak with your supervisor. Clara's face reddened. Supervisor, she repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. All right. She stalked to the galley, calling over her shoulder. Michael, get up here now. While Clara waited, Seifu allowed himself a tight smile. He noticed how difficult it was for her to maintain composure under the curious gazes of the other passengers. He remembered the boardrooms in Geneva, heated negotiations under crystal chandeliers, diplomats pressing him for every nuance. Yet none of that compared to the raw vulnerability of being publicly degraded. Moments later, Michael, the chief flight attendant, emerged, tall and gray at the temples. He studied Seifu's ticket, then his face. "Sir, you're in first class," he confirmed gently, handing the ticket back. "I'm sorry for the confusion," Clara huffed beside him. "He's disruptive. I want him off my section." Michael raised one eyebrow at Clara. "He hasn't been disruptive. He's been perfectly polite." He turned to Seifu with an apologetic nod. "Please accept my apologies. Mr. Seifu Bako-Nejad." Seifu supplied, voice soft. "Mr. Nejad. Enjoy your flight. Clara, please attend to all first-class passengers equally." Michael's tone brooked no argument. Clara bowed her head and stomped away, muttering under her breath. She paused at the row ahead, tossed out the champagne service she'd been carrying, and stalked back to the galley, leaving a delicate trail of spilled bubbles on the aisle carpet. The cabin exhaled collectively. Marianne leaned across to Seifu. "You handled that beautifully," she whispered. Seifu inclined his head in thanks, but his eyes were distant, reflecting the clouds racing past the window. Inside, a quiet storm churned. He recalled the moment in Geneva when Israeli and Iranian envoys had signed the peace memo, a handshake under white linen tablecloths, cameras flashing in solidarity. He thought of families on both sides who would sleep more peacefully tonight because of that accord. Yet here, thousands of feet in the air, a single act of bias nearly unraveled months of work. He opened his journal and wrote a line in English this time. "Prejudice is the weakest armor of the insecure." He paused, then closed the book. No need to dwell. His mission was far greater than one gate agent's anger. But beneath his calm, the embers of righteous indignation glowed. He felt a solemn shift in his chest, a determination that this moment would not be forgotten, that her slur against his dignity would speak louder than any official decree. Across the aisle, the tech entrepreneur tapped Malik on the shoulder and said softly, "Let him know if she tries anything else." Malik met Seifu's eyes and gave a small nod. The unspoken pact of solidarity settled in the cabin. Other passengers sat straighter, some clutching phones, as if ready to defend a man they barely knew but already admired. Clara reappeared at the front of the cabin, smoothing her uniform. She paused at the curtain, taking a deep breath before re-entering the calm of the galley. It was clear this storm was far from over. Seifu leaned back, buckled his belt again, and placed both hands over his heart for a moment. An old gesture of gratitude he'd learned during his first diplomatic tour. Then he looked out the window, where the desert sands of Arabia glowed under the rising sun, and thought, let this flight be the stage for more than just turbulence. Let it reveal our true character. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "Patience, Seifu. The real work begins now." The cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow as Flight 227 lifted into the sky. Outside, the Dubai skyline shrank into a tapestry of lights. Inside, first class settled into its practiced lull. But for Seifu Bako-Nejad, the hush felt more like a wall closing in. Clara and the other attendants moved through the rows with practiced efficiency, offering chilled towels, sparkling wine, trays of hors d'oeuvres. Every passenger received a polite smile and a crisp white napkin. Every passenger, that is, except the man in 1A. Malik, the junior attendant, paused at Seifu's row, carrying a silver tray. His expression was apologetic. "Sir, would you like a towel?" he asked softly, extending one plush linen across the aisle. Seifu offered a small nod. Malik lowered the towel onto his tray table, placing it gently rather than draping it over Seifu's hands, the way he did for others. Then Malik retreated, head bowed. A hush fell once more. Every other seat had been attended to. Seifu sat with his towel nearest the overhead light, untouched. He unfolded it and dabbed at his hands. But he couldn't shake the feeling of being singled out. Isolation. That was the word creeping through his mind. He pushed the towel aside and reached for his water bottle instead. Clara, stationed at the galley, glanced in his direction but said nothing. He leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment, recalling the steady click of gavel in Geneva's conference hall. He remembered diplomats from Tehran and Jerusalem, the charged air when they shook hands, the relief that briefly softened centuries of suspicion. Here, a few miles above the desert, one act of prejudice had undone any veneer of peace. When his neighbor in 1B, a well-dressed executive from Bahrain, leaned over to offer him a canapé, Seyfu shook his head gently. "Thank you," he said, voice low. "I prefer to eat later." The man nodded, eyes sympathetic but uncertain. Even Marianne Dupont, sitting in 2B, gave him a half-smile and a nod as she accepted her glass of champagne. But she didn't cross the aisle to fully stand by him. It wasn't her place, and she respected boundaries. So, Seyfu was left alone with the whir of engines and the soft scrape of service carts. He opened his notebook. The leather cover was cool under his fingertips. In neat English print, he wrote, "To be ignored is a privilege of those who fear your power." He paused to read the line, then smiled faintly. It felt good to put the feeling into words, to shape the discomfort into something he could hold in his hands. He closed the notebook and tucked it into his jacket pocket. A chime overhead signaled the start of the in-flight meal service. First-class tables unfolded, silverware gleamed, caviar service or the lamb and croûte. Sister, the senior attendant, asked another passenger with a flourish. The passenger chose the lamb. Moments later, the tray arrived with a delicate lattice crust and a sprig of rosemary. By the time the tray passed Seyfu's row, Clara stepped forward, cleared her throat, and said simply, "Water or tea?" No warm smile, no apology, just a terse question. "Water, please." Seyfu replied, voice calm. She nodded curtly and moved on, leaving him with a plastic cup and a paper napkin. The contrast was jarring. Everyone else enjoyed linen napkins and crystal glasses. He had a flimsy cup and a folded square of paper. He took a sip, savoring the coolness. His gaze drifted to the window, where clouds rolled beneath the wing. Somewhere below, troubled seas lapped distant shores. Somewhere below, families counted on that peace treaty. And somewhere below, a narrow gate agent had nearly derailed it all. A gentle cough drew his attention to the aisle. Malik had slipped back with a small plate of mixed nuts. "For when you're ready," Malik said, offering a tentative smile. Seyfu picked one walnut and ate it slowly, appreciating the kindness wrapped in quiet apology. Around him, the cabin resumed its subtle symphony, whispered phone calls, the faint clink of silverware, the soft rumble of conversation. But Seyfu remained apart, an island of dignity amid shifting currents of pity and discomfort. His thoughts turned inward. He recalled his father's words, "Strength isn't measured by how loudly you speak, but by how steadfast you stand." A century of Iranian history, woven with moments of defiance and dignity, pulsed through his veins now. A simple boarding lounge insult was nothing compared to the countless challenges he'd faced as a leader. He slipped his hand into his jacket and retrieved a small photograph tucked inside the notebook. It showed two men sharing a handshake over a map in a Geneva conference room, himself and the Israeli envoy. Beneath their hands, the document lay sealed. Peace, he thought, could be fragile. Dignity even more so. He placed the photo back and closed his eyes. For a moment, he felt the subtle vibration of the plane ascending through layers of air. The silent pressure of altitude reminded him of the pressure he carried every day, the responsibilities of a nation, the hopes of millions, the necessity to remain calm when the world seemed intent on chaos. He opened his eyes to find Marianne Dupont watching him again. This time, she stood and crossed to his aisle. She paused. "Mr. Nejad, I don't know if this means anything, but I'm recording everything," she whispered. "People need to see what happened." He blinked. "Thank you," he said softly. She returned to her seat, leaving him with a renewed sense of solidarity. In that gesture, he sensed an unspoken alliance, a shared understanding that some wrongs had to be witnessed before they could be righted. A sudden bump of turbulence rattled the cabin. Clara appeared at the entrance to first class, clipboard in hand, checking seatbelts with mechanical precision. When she reached seat 1A, she leaned in. "Tighten that belt," she said, voice flat. "Thank you," he replied after a beat, polite, measured, devoid of resentment. It was a kindness that cut deeper than her previous cruelty. Clara nodded curtly and moved on. He straightened his belt strap and settled back, He reached into his pocket once more and touched the outline of that single sentence he'd written. Then, reaching into another inner pocket, he withdrew a folded piece of cloth embossed with Iran's national emblem. He held it for a moment against his heart, allowing its weight, a silent reminder of duty and identity, to steady him anew. The engines roared as the plane pierced through a bank of clouds, sunlight streaming through the windows in golden shafts. In that moment, Seyfu Bako Najad sat alone but unbowed, isolated by prejudice yet fortified by purpose. He opened his notebook again but paused, pen hovering above the blank page. Instead, he closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, centering himself. The solitude of first class had never felt so vivid. Soon, he would break that isolation with the full force of his authority, quietly, deliberately, in a way no one would forget. For now, he remained still, writing nothing more, letting the world settle around him like dust after a storm. The overhead bins clicked shut, and the cabin light settled into a warm, amber glow. Outside, the plane cruised at 38,000 feet. But inside first class, the atmosphere crackled with a different kind of energy. Muted conversations rippled down the aisle, like whispers before a storm. Seyfu Bako Najad sat upright in seat 1A, eyes forward, reading nothing but the play of light on the clouds below. Yet he could feel the tension brewing around him. His silent poise only fanned the undercurrents of curiosity and unease. In 1B, Ambassador Marianne Dupont, a UN envoy who had attended the Geneva talks, exhaled slowly. She shifted in her seat, catching Malik's eye as he passed with a fresh bottle of still water. "Thank you," Marianne whispered, voice low but steady, as she handed the bottle across the aisle. Her gesture was small, but it spoke volumes. Malik nodded, his expression one of quiet solidarity. He lingered a beat before turning away, careful not to draw Clara's notice. A few rows back, a European defense contractor adjusted his lapel microphone. He'd been live streaming the flight since takeoff. He leaned forward, phone aimed at Seyfu and Marianne. "This," he said into the screen, "is more than in-flight drama. It's a test. Will she stand down under pressure?" His viewers fired off comments by the second. "In London, this is insane." Stockholm checking in, power to him. "How dare she?" Clara re-entered the cabin from the galley, clipboard in hand, marching toward the front. She glanced at the glimmer of phone screens, saw dozens of red recording lights blinking. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Control was slipping through her fingers. "Excuse me," she called out, voice brisk. "Final drink orders." She paused at Marianne's row, offering a forced smile. "Champagne." "Ma'am?" Marianne shook her head. "No." "Thank you." She turned to Seyfu. "Water." Clara's eyes flicked to Seyfu. "Yes." "Sir." Seyfu met her gaze and said gently, "Tea." "Please, green." "No sugar." She retrieved a teacup from her cart and placed it on his tray table with the precision of a surgeon. Then she looked away, as though the moment had been burned onto her memory. From 2C, an American journalist in a sharp blazer cleared her throat. "Miss, what's going on here?" She flipped her phone to selfie mode. "This passenger has a valid ticket. Why are you giving him the cold shoulder?" Clara's cheeks flared. She opened her mouth, then snapped it shut. Instead, she scurried to the galley, leaving the question hanging in the air. The journalist tapped her phone. "Everyone's watching," she murmured. A murmur of agreement followed, swelling until Marianne raised a hand. "I'd like to say something," she announced, voice calm but carrying. Clara hesitated outside the galley, then stepped back. Marianne stood and addressed the cabin ladies and gentlemen. "Our fellow passenger here is a man of dignity. He paid for his seat just like any of us." A ripple of applause broke out, subtle but unmistakable. Seyfu inclined his head, offering a polite nod. He folded his hands in his lap, letting Marianne's words echo through the confined space. In that charged silence, Clara emerged again, her uniform crisp but her composure frayed. She cleared her throat and said, "Sir, please remain in your seat for the remainder of the flight." It wasn't a request, it was a veiled attempt at punishment. The European contractor had moved to the bulkhead. "Phone steady. He's being punished for being himself," the contractor said to the camera. "Healthcare, diplomacy, or simple humanity. This is the cost of prejudice." At that, the cabin fell silent once more. Even the engine's hum seemed to hush as passengers turned toward Seifu, their collective gaze a silent jury. Seifu closed his eyes for a brief moment, then reopened them with quiet resolve. He leaned into his seat and tapped twice on the armrest. His signal to Malik. The junior attendant appeared, tucking a soft blanket behind Seifu's shoulders without asking. "That's very kind," Seifu said when Malik stepped away, voice warm. Malik nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his features. "Whatever you need." "Sir." Across the aisle, the American journalist whispered to her neighbor. "He's not angry. He's above it." Marianne caught the journalist's eye and offered a small, approving smile. Then she stood and retrieved a folder from her briefcase, a copy of the Geneva Peace Agreement, stamped and signed. She opened it to show Seifu, holding it for all to see. "Your work matters," she said softly. "Don't let this tarnish it." Seifu placed a hand over his heart and whispered, "Merci." But the flight attendant service continued around them. Another attendant glided through row 3 with a tray of exotic cheeses. She paused by Seifu's seat, looked down at his empty tray table, then moved on without offering. He picked up a cube of manchego from a nearby plate one row back and popped it in his mouth, savoring the nutty tang. Then he offered the plate back down the aisle, grace in motion. Suddenly, a soft chime echoed cabin crew prepare for arrival. "Fasten your seatbelts." Clara reappeared at the curtain, voice calm but distant. "Please return to your seats and secure your belts." As she passed Seifu's row, he saw her hand tremble ever so slightly around the curtain rod. Outside his window, the sun dipped below a ribbon of clouds. The cabin lights dimmed further, tinting the interior in twilight blue. Conversations softened. Phones were pocketed, yet tension lingered like aftershock. Seifu leaned back and closed his eyes, letting the gentle sway of the plane rock him. He wasn't alone around him. Passengers sat straighter, some whispering words of support, others exchanging worried glances. Their energy had shifted from curiosity to solidarity. He thought of the next step, the revelation waiting on the tarmac at Tehran International. 8 armored vehicles, a red carpet, and a silent whisper of global scrutiny. The tiniest gate agent's slap would soon trigger a political thunderclap. A moment later, a child's voice piped up from 2 rows behind Mommy. "Why is he sad?" A mother glanced back and whispered, "He's a hero, sweetie." The cabin exhaled a collective breath. Seifu opened his eyes and the world resumed its muted buzz. He reached into his jacket again, brushing fingertips over the national emblem tucked inside. It gave him a quiet reassurance. He tapped his notebook 2 dots, waiting for words. Instead, he closed it and placed it on his tray table. Let them talk amongst themselves. Actions were coming soon. Words could wait. Clara watched from the galley hatch, arms crossed. As the cabin's mood ebbed into a charged calm, she realized that every whispered word, every supportive glance, had chipped away at her authority. The rising tension was no longer just around Seifu, it was everywhere. And as the plane soared toward Tehran, Seifu Bako Najad felt the weight of every eye upon him, not as scrutiny, but as an unspoken promise they were ready to stand with him when he revealed the truth. A soft chime echoed overhead as the seatbelt sign clicked off once more, and the cabin relaxed into its post-service rhythm. Passengers leaned back, phone screens dimmed. An airline's signature lullabies drifted from the overhead speakers. Yet in first class, the air felt charged, like the pause before a storm breaks. Seifu Bako Najad reclined in 1A, arms folded, eyes on the pale blue sky beyond the window. He'd sipped his tea and let the other attendants tend to the regular order's sparkling water, a selection of macaroons, a final round of hot towels. But Clara hadn't touched his row since the green checkmark confirmed his ticket's validity. And now, as the cabin settled, he sensed her watching. Sure enough, Clara re-emerged from the galley, clipboard in hand and frustration etched across her features. She paused at the end of the aisle, her gaze sweeping the first-class cabin like a general inspecting troops. Phones rose again, cameras ready. "Sir," she said, voice deceptively calm. "Is this seat really comfortable for you?" Seifu glanced at her, expression neutral. "It's fine." "Thank you." She leaned in, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "I'm surprised you even know what comfort is. Must be hard when your life is usually about survival." not luxury. A hush fell. Clara straightened, as if savoring the sting of her words. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, inhaling gently. When he opened them, they were steady, an unspoken challenge. He clasped his hands in his lap and said nothing. Around them, passengers exchanged uneasy looks. Marianne Dupont in 2B frowned, pressing her lips together. The tech entrepreneur in 1C shook his head at Malik, who stood by helplessly. A hush of conversation rippled. Did she really say that? What does she mean by survival? Clara's lips curved into a cold smile. I doubt you've ever known anything beyond hardship. Yet here you are, pretending to belong among us. She tapped her clipboard. What would you like next? The filet mignon, the dame. Seifu's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. He lifted his chin and looked past her, fixing his gaze on the distant horizon. The quiet elegance of his posture spoke more than any retort. Malik swallowed and stepped forward. Ma'am, please, he's a guest like any other. Clara whirled on him, eyes blazing. Don't lecture me. Malik, you're new. You don't know what he represents. Seifu watched this exchange with a calm detachment. He thought back to his meeting with Israeli delegates, how he'd bridged centuries of distrust with a single handshake. He remembered his mother's gentle wisdom. You cover more ground with kindness than with force. Behind Clara, Michael, the chief attendant, approached quietly. He laid a hand on her shoulder. Clara, that's enough. His voice was firm, yet measured. We serve everyone equally here. She jerked away, cheeks flushed. He. Michael cut her off. He paid for seat 1A. That is the only criterion. Clara spun away, stomach churning. She retreated to the galley, leaving Michael and Malik behind. The two men exchanged a sympathetic look before returning to their posts. In the sudden lull, the cabin felt even smaller. Phones lowered. The hum of engines filled the space, as if reminding everyone that the real journey had only begun. Seifu sat motionless, but inside, a current of resolve gathered strength. Each insult, each dismissive glance, was a brick in the wall he would soon dismantle. He reached into his jacket and touched the folded emblem of the Iranian flag, his silent talisman of duty. Marianne leaned over again, voice soft. You shouldn't have to endure that. He turned to her, expression grateful but composed. Thank you. My work requires resilience. She nodded, sliding back to her seat. The entrepreneur tapped his tablet and whispered, This is going viral. A gentle bump of turbulence rattled the cabin. A few nervous gasps, a clipped please remain seated, and the plane steadied. Clara emerged once more, eyes darting down the aisle. She passed Seifu's row without a word, but her silence roared louder than any insult. The American journalist in 3C leaned forward. He's not reacting. He remains unshaken. She flipped her phone to show the live comments. Hero. Silent power. Someone call corporate. Seifu closed his eyes, briefly savoring the solidarity radiating from those around him. He considered writing another line, something in Farsi or English. Perhaps dignity is not granted by another's approval. But he stopped. Words would come later. Instead, he allowed a small, calm smile to touch his lips. He shifted in his seat and reached for his water, tilting the plastic cup in acknowledgement to Malik, who handed it over quietly. Clara, now visibly rattled, stalked to the front cabin door. She pressed her back against the bulkhead, arms folded, watching him like a hawk. Seifu met her gaze through the reflection of the window, two figures silhouetted against the sky. Neither blinked. Behind him, the murmur of passengers grew into a low chorus of support. Some exchanged nods, others tapped on their phones, capturing the moment. No one applauded yet. This was still the gathering storm. The lights dimmed further, signaling the approach of evening. The cabin settled into a twilight hush, but Clara's presence remained a jagged edge in the calm. She returned to the galley, hands trembling as she set down her clipboard. Michael approached her, voice gentle. You okay? She nodded, voice barely above a whisper. I just... He placed a reassuring hand on her arm. Remember why we're here, Service. Respect. She drew a shaky breath and nodded again. Meanwhile, passengers refastened their belts in preparation for descent. In 1A, Seifu fastened his with a deliberate click, heart steady. He thought of the few hours left until the big reveal, the moment the world would learn he was the president of Iran. He felt no triumph, only the weight of responsibility. Yet in this cauldron of prejudice and quiet defiance, he knew the real victory would come not through humiliation, but through the unwavering dignity he maintained. As the plane banked gently over the desert, painting the cabin in hues of gold and crimson, Seifu leaned back one last time and closed his eyes. The hum of engines grew steady beneath him, a promise of calm after the next wave of turbulence. A hush settled over the cabin as the seatbelt sign flickered off and the prepare for landing chimes sounded. First-class passengers leaned forward, clinking trays and folding napkins. The plane dipped slightly, a gentle reminder that Tehran was drawing near. Seifu Bako Nejad sat motionless in 1A, gaze fixed on the wingtip slicing through copper-tinged clouds. He tucked his hands into his lap, the notebook and pen safely stowed. He could feel the resignation in the air. A flight that began with prejudice was about to land in the crucible of revelation. Across the aisle, Ambassador Marianne Dupont straightened her blazer and offered Seifu a sympathetic nod. "Almost there," she whispered. He inclined his head. Behind him, Malik, his junior attendant, hovered nervously near the galley door. His phone buzzed again, an urgent WhatsApp notification from the airline's ground coordinator in Tehran. Malik's heart pounded. "Check video now," it said, over and over. He glanced at Clara, who was supervising cabin preparations with forced composure. Clara's uniform was immaculate, her lipstick freshly applied, but her eyes darted anxiously from passenger to passenger. She stood just inside the curtain, clipboard in hand, checking that every seat pocket was empty. Malik swallowed and approached her. "Ma'am?" His voice was low, urgent. Clara looked up, lips pressed tight. "What is it?" He held out his phone. Screen unlocked to a viral clip circulating among the crew. Hundreds of views, dozens of comments. Everyone on the ground was seeing it. 2. Clara's brow furrowed as she took the phone. The video began in shaky, grainy footage Seifu in a crisp olive military uniform, standing behind a podium draped in the Iranian flag. The guard of honor stood at attention, soldiers in full dress around him, the nameplate glowing President Seifu Bako Nejad, Islamic Republic of Iran. Clara's fingers trembled as she swiped for more details, images of armored vehicles lined up on the tarmac. A red carpet rolled out beside a sleek black limousine. The caption scrolled beneath President Nejad returning from secret Geneva peace talks. Official arrival footage. Her face blanched, her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Malik with wide, terrified eyes. This can't be real." Malik's voice was a whisper. "I got it from our Tehran office. They're waiting on the runway." Clara's knees weakened. She staggered back, heart hammering. "We have to stop the plane." Malik shook his head. "It's too late. We're on final approach." Clara's cheeks flushed with shame and panic. She glanced toward the cabin door, where Michael was organizing service carts for landing. She had no idea how to face him, or the passengers, now that her victim was no mere scammer, but the head of state. The cabin lights dimmed further in preparation for descent. Phones slipped into pockets. Eyes flickered toward Clara and Malik. The energy shifted, as if the cabin collectively sensed the stakes had been raised. In 2C, the American journalist leaned forward. "What's going on?" she murmured to her neighbor. "Is he the president?" Seifu heard the question, though he remained serenely impassive. He had expected this moment, knew that prejudice crumbles when power is revealed. But he remained seated, projecting calm. Clara cleared her throat, gripping the curtain rod. She swallowed, forcing a steady breath. Then she stepped into the cabin, phone in hand, and raised her voice, just loud enough for first class to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice trembling. There's been a development." The cabin quieted instantly. Passengers exchanged puzzled looks. Marianne Dupont sat forward, eyebrows arched. Clara lifted the phone so everyone could see. On screen, the still image of Seifu in uniform glowed. "This passenger," she stammered, "is President Seifu Bako Nejad of the Islamic Republic of Iran." A gasp rippled through the rows. The tech entrepreneur in 1C jerked his phone back out, recording furiously. The European defense contractor muttered, "No way." A businessman in 3A leaned over to his wife and whispered, "That's unbelievable." Clara's voice caught in her throat. "He's returning from peace talks in Geneva. They're waiting for him with a full honor guard. Marianne Dupont stood, placing a steadying hand on her seat back. "Thank you for clarifying," she said gently, though her eyes brimmed with empathy for Seifu and pity for Clara. Seifu remained still as the world around him buzzed. He closed his eyes briefly, catching his breath. This was the moment he'd prepared for the pivot from humiliated passenger to honored statesman. Clara sank into the nearest seat, phone slipping from her hand. She stared at the carpet, cheeks burning with regret. Malik hovered at her shoulder, uncertain. Michael appeared then, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene, the downcast flight attendant, the stunned passengers, the tribal energy coalescing around Seifu. He turned to Seifu and bowed his head in apology. "Sir, we should have handled this differently." Seifu opened his eyes and offered a small, gracious smile. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you for acknowledging the mistake." A hush fell again as the seatbelt sign flickered on. The engines rumbled louder as the plane pitched downward, rupturing the thin barrier between cabin and runway. Clara's voice broke, "Mr. President, I don't know what to say." Seifu inclined his head, eyes kind but firm. "Respect is not earned by titles alone. It is owed to every human being." Clara closed her eyes, lips quivering. Around her, passengers reunited in a shared epiphany. Privilege and prejudice can crumble in an instant, but silence in the face of injustice can wield a power far greater than any slap. Outside the window, runway lights emerged like jewels. 7 armored vehicles with Iranian insignia waited in formation. A red carpet gleamed under floodlights. The plane touched down with a gentle thud, and the cabin exhaled in unison as the wheels rolled over the tarmac. The viral video clipped through the cabin speakers, passengers' phones buzzing with alerts. Comments streamed, "President slapped, flight attendant fired." "This is going global." Clara slipped her phone into her pocket. Shoulders slumped. Malik offered her a glass of water, which she accepted with shaking hands. Seifu unbuckled his belt, stood, and retrieved his carry-all. He paused at the aisle, facing Clara. Her eyes met his, filled with remorse. He nodded once, respectfully. Clara's voice cracked, "I'm sorry." Seifu inclined his head. "Thank you." He stepped into the jet bridge where 8 guards snapped to attention. The red carpet awaited. Cameras flashed. Passengers pressed phones to windows, capturing the transformation of a common passenger into a head of state. In that moment, the world watched President Seifu Bako-Nejad descend, no longer a victim of prejudice, but a living testament to the power of dignity and the cost of injustice. The jet bridge doors slid open with a soft hiss, and a burst of crisp morning air rushed in. Runway lights stretched out before the cabin door, gleaming like a path of diamonds laid bare under the dawn sky. In that instant, first-class passengers pressed forward, the tension from the cabin trailing behind them like a current. Seifu Bako-Nejad stepped off the plane first. Each footstep echoed on the metal ramp as he moved toward the bright glare of floodlights. At the bottom of the stairs, 8 uniformed guards snapped to attention, dark trousers, polished boots, and ceremonial rifles slung neatly at their sides. A deep crimson carpet lay rolled out beside them, a royal welcome for someone of unmistakable importance. Clara stood frozen at the threshold, her clipboard discarded at her feet. The hatch to first class had become a stage, and she the only actor without a script. Her palm trembled against the cabin door's handrail. She watched, mouth ajar. Passengers clustered at the windows, some craning their necks to whisper, others holding phones aloft. A hush fell that felt heavier than any engine roar. No one dared speak. The gravity of the moment pressed in from every angle. At the bottom of the ramp, Seifu paused. He straightened his jacket and reached up to adjust his lapel pin, a discreet emblem of Iran's presidential seal. In the glow of the runway lights, that simple hand motion carried more weight than any speech. Cameras in every hand clicked and whirred. Clara's eyes snapped from the guards to the red carpet, then back to Seifu, her skin drained of color. "That man," she thought, "he's not just some passenger." A hush of disbelief rippled through the assembled travelers. Marianne Dupont, standing near the cabin door, whispered to the tech entrepreneur beside her, "This is unbelievable." The entrepreneur shook his head, lips pressed tight. "Looks like he's not only the president, but the one in charge of this whole ceremony." At the foot of the ramp, Seifu inclined his head slightly, an unspoken greeting to the honor guard. A bugler to the side lifted his instrument to his lips and sounded 3 clear notes of a military fanfare that rippled across the tarmac. The deep, brassy call reverberated inside the plane, sealing the reveal. Clara closed her eyes, fighting the impulse to look away. She could hear the collective intake of breath within first class. Every single passenger had gone from bystander to witness in that moment. The fanfare ended, and an aide stepped forward to offer Seifu a sheaf of briefing papers. He accepted them with a quiet nod, eyes scanning the top sheet for a final confirmation of protocol. The runway lights danced on the edges of those pages before he slipped them into his coat pocket. Clara finally found voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper, "Mr. President." Seifu turned, regard gentle yet firm. He lifted a hand in acknowledgement, then let it fall. No flourish, no self-aggrandizement, just the calm dignity of a man who understood the power of silence. Passengers pressed closer to the exit, phones capturing every nuance, the salute of the guards, the steady click of Seifu's polished shoes on the ramp. The way the executive from Bahrain raised his phone in tribute. Clara sank back against the cabin wall, palm flat against cold metal, knuckles white. Behind her, Malik and Michael exchanged looks of stunned relief. Malik's hand hovered over Clara's shoulder, but he hesitated, uncertain whether to offer comfort or distance. The fanfare gave way to the hum of idle engines and murmurs of staff coordinating ground operations. A cluster of press photographers jockeyed for position at the edge of the red carpet, lens barrels trained like hungry eyes. Seifu took 3 measured steps down the carpet, nodding once at each guard. Cameras popped. The buzz of drones hovered overhead, news outlets capturing every angle for instant broadcast. At the bottom of the carpet, the Iranian flag fluttered on a flagpole. Seifu paused and straightened his posture, drawing in a deep breath. He looked back at the plane as though seeing it anew, the polished fuselage, the long line of windows, the cabin doors still open like a portal between 2 worlds. Inside, Clara watched him with tear-bright eyes. The weight of her mistake pressed like a stone in her chest. Yet as she watched Seifu's measured grace, his refusal to gloat, his silent acknowledgement of her apology, she felt something shift inside her. Seifu turned toward the cabin once more, his voice carrying clearly across the ramp. "Respect is not a privilege," he said softly, "but a duty owed to every person." A murmur of agreement rose from the passengers. Phones lowered, replaced by nods, and murmured, "Yes, sir." Clara listened, chest heaving, and recognized that she had not only insulted a head of state, but also damaged the dignity of every passenger who believed in civility. An official aide approached and offered a hand. Seifu accepted. Together, they walked down the carpet toward the waiting limousine, its door opened by a uniformed chauffeur. The convoy of black vehicles idled in precise formation, ready to whisk him away. Passengers streamed out behind him. Marianne Dupont, the entrepreneur, the journalists, all pressed for a closer look. Clara slipped out last, shoulders hunched, hands clasped before her. When she finally reached the end of the ramp, she stood a few feet behind Seifu, head bowed. Seifu paused before the limo, turning to face her. He lifted a hand just enough to catch her eye. Clara's tears welled, but her lips trembled into a tentative smile. He offered a nod, a gesture of forgiveness, not triumph. The chauffeur closed the door behind him. The limo glided away, tires whispering on hot tarmac. Guards fell in step beside it, and the fanfare's echo faded into the desert dawn. Clara remained on the ramp, watching until the last taillight winked out of sight. Then she turned and walked back toward the terminal doors, every step a reminder that some slaps echo far beyond a single cheek. They can unveil truths that reshape an entire world. The limousine slid away under the watchful eyes of journalists and onlookers. But Seifu Bako-Najad wasn't headed straight to the waiting convoy of advisors. He paused on the tarmac, lifted his phone, and tapped the screen. A live stream icon blinked red at the top corner. Tens of thousands already watching. He adjusted the camera angle to capture the receding plane, the lights of the airport behind him, and the small cluster of passengers who had followed his exit. He cleared his throat, words carrying effortlessly over the hush that fell among the gathering crowd. One slap didn't just humiliate a man. It paused the chance for peace across an entire region. The line landed with a resonance that rippled through both the live audience and those standing before him. He paused to let it sink in, then continued. Prejudice is the weakest armor of the insecure. Respect is not a privilege granted by fortune or titles. It is a duty owed to every human being. He slipped the phone into his pocket and turned to face the small group. The ambassador from Geneva raised her eyebrows in approval. A handful of crew members, Clara among them, stood at attention, their faces a mixture of awe and remorse. Clara swallowed hard, stepping forward. Sir, she said, voice unsteady. I apologize for my actions on board. I failed in my duty to serve with respect. Seifu inclined his head, offering a gracious nod. Thank you. Apology accepted. What matters now is how we move forward. Behind him, the UN envoy placed a comforting hand on Clara's shoulder. She wiped her eyes, then looked up at Seifu with renewed resolve. He motioned to the cameras again. Let this be more than news. Let it spark change. I invite the world, airlines, passengers, governments to join me in a campaign called Respect Above Rank. Soon, a ripple of applause greeted the initiative. Journalists scribbled notes. Camera lenses swiveled to catch every expression. An aide finally approached, placing a discreet earpiece in Seifu's ear. He listened for a moment, eyes narrowing in concentration. Then he turned back. We have confirmation the peace accord signing ceremony will proceed as scheduled. Your presence here, this statement, has reinforced global commitment. Relief and pride flashed across Seifu's face. He raised a hand in a final gesture of unity. May we never forget civility is the cornerstone of progress, and honoring our shared humanity is the greatest legacy we can leave. With that, he stepped toward the waiting convoy, 8 armored vehicles, their engines rumbling with purpose. Passengers and crew lined the path, some wiping tears, others lifting phones one last time to capture the moment. Clara lingered at the end of the line, catching Seifu's eye. He gave her a brief, encouraging smile before turning to lead the procession. As the motorcade rolled into motion, the live stream continued to pulse with comments true leadership. Speech of the year, respect above rank. In those few minutes, Seifu Bakonejad had transformed a personal slight into a universal call for dignity. And in doing so, he reminded the world that silence and compassion can be the most powerful weapons against hate. Within hours of President Nejad's live-streamed address, the world shifted on its axis. By dawn, the United Nations Security Council had convened an emergency session, gavel pounding as diplomats from every continent gathered to grapple with an unprecedented breach of protocol, an airline incident that bloomed into a full-blown geopolitical crisis. In the glass-walled chamber in New York, the Iranian ambassador rose first. His suit was impeccably pressed, his expression grave. Colleagues, he began, voice echoing under the vaulted ceiling. What happened on Flight 227 was more than a slap. It halted the Geneva Accord, a $3 billion peace pact, and triggered the immediate freeze of $2 billion in reconstruction aid for the region. The Security Council buzzed with murmurs. A British delegate drummed her fingers on the table. We cannot let an act of blatant discrimination derail years of diplomacy, she declared. A French envoy nodded, pushing his glasses up. This is a test not just of airline etiquette, but of our collective will to uphold international agreements. Cut to world news networks. Breaking banners scrolled across screens in London, Tokyo, and Johannesburg. Iran freezes upon slap incident. Geneva Accord in limbo. $1. 2B8 on ice. Headlines blazed in bold type. Social media headquarters staffed around the clock, filtering expert commentary, memes, and outraged hashtags. In Tehran, state television cut into programming. Footage played of President Nejad's measured words on the tarmac. One slap didn't just humiliate a man. It paused the chance for peace across an entire region. The anchor's eyes glistened as she summarized the UN's decision to delay the signing indefinitely. Meanwhile, in Washington, aid agencies scrambled. The World Bank's regional office halted transfers earmarked for rebuilding schools in border communities. NGO staff exchanged frantic calls. These communities need those funds, one aid worker lamented, all because someone refused to see a human being. Back on the plane, Clara's suspension was announced publicly, an indefinite leave pending a full investigation by the airline's ethics board. Press releases cited unacceptable conduct and pledged comprehensive bias training for all staff. Yet no amount of corporate policy could erase the viral video or its fallout. Across Europe and Asia, think tanks published scathing op-eds. In Berlin, a leading foreign policy expert wrote, "This incident reveals how fragile our diplomatic architecture can be when human dignity is treated as optional." In New Delhi, a human rights NGO launched a campaign titled "Respect Above Rank," echoing Nejad's call, urging airlines worldwide to adopt mandatory empathy training. Within Iran, citizens took to the streets in peaceful demonstrations of solidarity. They held placards reading "Dignity over discrimination," chanting respect for all. The streets of Tehran, once tense with rumors of renewed conflict, now thrummed with hope that a single moment of prejudice had sparked a more profound awakening. In the halls of Geneva, where the original peace talks had unfolded, envoys regrouped by video conference. The lead Israeli negotiator addressed the screen. "We must resume the accord. This slap may have paused our work, but it will not define our future." Fingers hovered over microphones, bracing for renewed dialogue. On every continent, the news cycle churned. Late-night hosts lampooned the absurdity, a gate agent's ignorance snowballing into a near-global crisis. Pundits praised Nejad's restraint, his choice to turn personal humiliation into a universal lesson in respect. By evening, the UN issued a statement. In light of the developments, the Security Council reaffirms its commitment to the Geneva Accord and calls for immediate resumption of talks. We stand with President Nejad's message. No act of prejudice can eclipse our shared humanity. As the sun set over Tehran, President Nejad returned to the presidential palace. He entered the chamber where the stalled peace agreement lay folded on the table. He placed his hand gently on the document and whispered, "Let this crisis remind us why we fight for peace." In that moment, he understood the true scale of his journey from a silent passenger in first class to the moral fulcrum of a global movement. The slap had shattered more than a cheek. It had fractured complacency. And now, in its aftermath, the world was waking up to the power of respect above all else. The grand hall of the presidential palace in Tehran buzzed with anticipation. Rows of international press had filled every aisle, cameras and microphones poised like sentries. Behind the podium, draped with the Iranian flag, stood President Seyfu Nejad, his face composed, eyes clear. He surveyed the sea of reporters from the Geneva Accord. Envoys and news outlets worldwide before offering a small, resolute nod. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began, voice steady and warm. A murmur rippled through the crowd. This wasn't a demand for retaliation or a call for retribution. Instead, Seyfu leaned forward slightly, palms resting on the lectern as he delivered a message that would echo far beyond these walls. "We cannot allow one small act of cruelty to derail a greater mission of peace. No slap, no insult, no prejudice, however shocking, should hold sway over our collective will to reconcile." He paused, letting it sink in. Flashbulbs erupted. Somewhere in the back, Clara, suspended flight attendant, stood among the press corps, notebook in hand, eyes wide with awe. Seyfu's words weren't aimed at punishment, but at progress. "Today, I announced the launch of the Respect Above Rank initiative, a global training program for every individual who serves the public. From flight crews to customs officers to hospitality staff, we will teach empathy, dignity, and the simple truth that respect is owed to all." A reporter from the BBC raised her hand. "Mr. President, will this program be mandatory for international airlines?" Seyfu nodded. "Yes, we are coordinating with the International Civil Aviation Organization and partner governments to integrate this curriculum into every airline's standards. It will cover unconscious bias, conflict de-escalation, and cultural sensitivity. We will measure success not by fines, but by passenger surveys and incident reductions." He stepped back slightly, gaze sweeping the room. "I do not seek to humiliate anyone further, least of all the woman whose actions sparked this moment. My hope is that Clara, and every person like her, will learn from this, grow from it, and help create a service industry that lifts every soul it serves." A hush fell, then applause, slow, deliberate, building into a steady rhythm. Cameras panned to Clara, who dabbed at her eyes as fellow journalists offered her sympathetic nods. Seifu allowed the applause to fade before continuing. Respect above rank is more than policy. It's a pledge. A pledge that we treat each other as humans first, officials second, because true progress is founded not on stature or title, but on the simple dignity with which we treat one another. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a small white folder stamped with the Respect Above Rank seal. Holding it aloft, he declared, "Today, we sign this agreement. Today, we choose kindness over contempt, unity over division." Behind him, the assembled diplomats rose to sign, ink pens clicking in unison. The UN envoy from Switzerland leaned over to whisper, "This will change everything," as Seifu stepped away from the podium. His face softened with quiet satisfaction. He crossed to a side table where Clara waited, heart pounding. She extended her hand, trembling slightly. He took it with gentle firmness and offered a gracious smile that spoke louder than any rebuke. Outside, the statement exploded across global news feeds. Iran president launches global respect initiative after airline incident. Respect above rank, the campaign poised to transform flight etiquette worldwide. In that moment, Seifu Bako Najad knew the next challenge lay not in headlines, but in hearts and minds. But for now, he allowed himself a brief exhale, confident that a single speech, rooted in empathy rather than vengeance, could indeed shift the course of history. Weeks after the inaugural Respect Above Rank signing, Tehran streets pulsed with fresh hope. Banners bearing the campaign logo fluttered over city squares. Airports around the world streamed training modules online. In the quiet of her apartment, Clara sat at a small desk, pen trembling in hand. "Dear President Nejad," she wrote, "I am sorry, not because you are Iran's leader, but because you are a human being who deserved respect." Her letter was honest and unadorned. No excuses, just remorse and a promise to change. She folded the paper carefully and sealed it in its envelope. Later that morning, she boarded a volunteer shuttle to a local refugee center, one of many community partners in Respect Above Rank, and spent the day listening, serving meals, and learning stories that humbled her. Meanwhile, in the Oval Office-style study of the presidential palace, Seifu Bako Nejad sat behind his desk. The morning sun slanted across the polished wood, illuminating the Iranian emblem etched at its center. He placed the peace accord and new campaign charter side by side, then lifted Clara's envelope from the top drawer. With measured calm, he slid it open. His eyes traced her neat handwriting as the message unfolded: accountability, empathy, growth. He folded the letter gently and tucked it into a leather-bound collection of documents, his silent chronicle of lessons learned. That afternoon, Seifu convened a meeting of airline CEOs, training directors, and government ministers. He opened with Clara's words, "I failed in my duty to serve with respect." The room fell silent. He looked up. Those words remind us why this initiative matters. Respect above rank is not a slogan, it's a daily practice. Over the next hour, delegates shared progress, new bias awareness workshops in Frankfurt, empathy simulations in Tokyo, passenger feedback tools in New York. Each milestone was celebrated, each setback addressed with transparency. As the meeting adjourned, Seifu stepped aside for Clara, who had been invited as a guest speaker. She approached the podium, voice steady. "I once judged a man by his appearance," she said. "Today, I pledge to judge only by character, always." Applause filled the chamber. Months later, the Geneva Accord was reactivated. Seifu returned to Switzerland to officiate the signing. Their $3 billion pact renewed under a new clause emphasizing human dignity. Journalists noted the contrast, a peace deal forged not only by treaties, but by the simple insistence on respect. In airports from Dubai to Dallas, flight crews wore Respect Above Rank pins on their lapels. Passengers posted positive reviews online, stories of service born of empathy rather than protocol. Years on, children in Tehran schools learned the campaign's principles in civics class. A mural painted in the terminal showed a gate agent extending a hand, not a slap, to a blindfolded passenger, symbol of trust restored. And in his study, Seifu's leather binder lay open to Clara's apology, a reminder that redemption is possible, that a single act of courage, whether to slap or to forgive, can reverberate across the world. As he turned off the lamp each night, he folded the cover over that page, letting its quiet truth speak louder than any headline. Nobody is above another, for respect is the legacy we leave behind. Which moment moved you the most? Highlight 2-3. Key beats the slap. The reveal. The respect above rank speech, then ask. Comment below. Which moment hit you hardest? Seat 1A. The one Sandra tore in half. It wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. It was about memory and reminders. Because even after all the legislation, press, and signatures, the truth remained. The fight wasn't over. Sophie entered the room with a fresh mug of coffee and a flash drive. "You might want to see this," she said, plugging it into the conference monitor. A video loaded. Security footage from a small airport in Nevada. A black woman, mid-50s, well-dressed, stood at a check-in counter, calm, polite, smiling. The agent across from her rolled his eyes, whispered something to a colleague, then told her, flatly, that the flight was full and her seat had been reassigned. No explanation. Sophie paused the video. "She's a school principal from Oakland," she said. "Her name's Denise Randall. The ticket was valid. The seat was hers." Jalen leaned back. "So it's still happening?" Sophie nodded. "Less often, but it's not gone." Rachel looked over. "What do you want to do?" Jalen didn't answer right away. Then he stood and walked to the glass wall. Beyond it, dozens of engineers tapped away at their terminals, updating, monitoring, fine-tuning the algorithm that now governed over 120 million travelers. He turned. "We're not a watchdog," he said. "We're a mirror. If the system wants to pretend it's clean, we show them every speck of dirt." Sophie tilted her head. "You want to go public with this?" "No," Jalen said. "I want her to." The next day, Sophie reached out to Denise, and within 72 hours, Denise Randall stood on a stage in front of 2,000 aviation professionals at the Global Passenger Ethics Conference in Washington, D.C. She didn't scream. She didn't accuse. She told the truth. "I'm not famous," she said. "I don't run a tech firm. I don't have a legal team on speed dial. But I've taught 5th grade for 29 years, and last week, I taught the most important lesson of my life from behind a check-in counter." Her voice didn't shake. "My dignity is not a variable, and if your system sees it as one, then your system is broken." She walked off stage to a standing ovation, and in the crowd, quietly clapping near the back, was Jalen. That night, he got a call from the White House. The Secretary of Transportation wanted to nominate him to lead a new federal task force, the Passenger Justice Initiative, a joint effort between DOT, FAA, and the Department of Justice, aimed at making ethical air travel a non-negotiable standard, not a PR goal. He didn't say yes, not yet. Instead, he walked out onto the rooftop of the Miles Trust building. The city buzzed below. Planes blinked in the night sky, taking off, landing, circling. Rachel joined him a few minutes later. "You okay?" He nodded. "But I keep thinking about one thing," he said. "What if I hadn't gotten on that flight? What if I just walked away quietly when she tore my ticket?" Rachel shrugged. "Someone else would have stood up. Eventually." Jalen shook his head. "No, not like this." He looked down at the streets, so full of life, noise, movement. "We don't change the world all at once," he said. "We do it in moments, small ones, quiet ones. But if we honor them, they echo." Rachel stepped beside him. "You ready for what's next?" Jalen smiled. "I was born ready. I just didn't know it until they told me I didn't belong." 6 months later, a small bronze plaque was installed in Terminal B at JFK. Right above Gate 12, the inscription was simple, in honor of every passenger who was ever told they didn't belong and chose to stay anyway. This gate marks the first flight grounded in protest that reshaped the future of airline ethics. It didn't mention Jalen's name. He requested it that way, because by then, it was bigger than him. much bigger. The Loyalty Integrity Treaty had now been adopted by 42 countries across 5 continents. Aviation schools were integrating the JALIN protocol into their training curriculum. And every airport that wanted access to the Visa Air Alliance loyalty valuation platform had to agree to the Passenger Equity Certification Program, or risk being blacklisted from the 3.1b interbank system that JALIN's platform quietly governed. But for JALIN, the real legacy wasn't in the numbers. It was in the people. At a quiet lounge in Chicago O'Hare, a teenage black boy named Miles sat across from his grandmother, showing her how to check her upgrade status on her phone. "It says you got it," he grinned. She looked surprised. "They never upgrade me," Miles shrugged. "They do now." In Atlanta, a Muslim woman wearing a hijab was pulled aside for a random check. Before the agent could speak, the supervisor appeared behind him. "Nope," she said. "Passengers already cleared. Equity flag verified. Let her board." In Boston, a deaf passenger received a real-time text alert when her gate was reassigned, automatically translated through the new accessibility algorithm tied into the Miles Trust platform. All of it quiet, all of it real.